What makes a single soldier step into a jungle filled with unseen enemies, knowing a single mistake could be the end? And how does one man, armed with a rifle the army didn't even want him to carry, become the hunter of hunters in one of the deadliest battles of the Pacific? This is the hidden story of a quiet marksman whose skill changed an entire front line without most of the world ever knowing his name. In January of 1943, the island of Guadalcanal was a place where sound and silence were equally dangerous. The jungle around Point Cruz looked calm from a distance, but American troops knew better. A single crack from within the banyan trees could drop a man instantly. Japanese snipers moved like shadows, climbing before dawn, hiding inside thick branches, and waiting for hours without a sound. 14 Americans had been killed in just 3 days, and fear was spreading through the infantry lines. Into that chaos stepped a 27-year-old officer named John George. He was quiet, slim, sharp-eyed, and calm in a way that made other soldiers curious. Before the war, he had been Illinois state rifle champion, hitting targets at extreme distances with ease. But out here, none of that mattered unless he could prove it under real fire. He carried a rifle the Army called a toy, a Winchester Model 70 with a lightweight civilian scope he had bought using 2 years of his National Guard pay. The Army wanted him to drop it and take a standard Garand like everyone else. He didn't listen. 3 days earlier, his battalion commander had called him in. The snipers were killing men faster than sickness. They needed someone who could see what others could not. They needed George. By dawn on January 22nd, he was already inside the ruins of a Japanese bunker facing the groves west of Point Cruz. The morning was humid, and the air carried the smell of mud and coconut trees. George lay still, his breathing steady. His scope was only 2.5 power, weak by military standards, but he trusted his eyes more than glass. At 9:17, he noticed something, a tiny movement, almost nothing, high in a banyan tree about 240 yards away. No wind, no animals, just a small shift in a branch that caught his eye. He studied it slowly. A darker shape blended into the bark. A man. The sniper was positioned perfectly, sitting between thick branches, facing the trail where Americans moved supplies. He would have been invisible to almost anyone else. George adjusted for 2 clicks of wind, controlled his breathing, and pressed the trigger. His rifle kicked back. The enemy sniper dropped from the tree and fell nearly 90 feet to the ground. He didn't celebrate. Japanese snipers worked in pairs. If one had been there, the other was watching. For almost half an hour, he scanned tree after tree, moving the scope from branch to branch. At 9:43, he spotted the second one, climbing down, trying to retreat. He fired again. Another body tumbled through the leaves. By noon, he had 5 kills. Word spread quickly among the American troops, but George refused to let anyone watch him work. The Japanese were adapting, becoming quieter and stiller, learning his rhythm. The day ended without further movement, and he returned to headquarters covered in mud, sweat, and silence. His commander simply told him to return at dawn. But the next morning brought heavy rain. The jungle was nearly invisible. He waited inside the bunker until the clouds began to lift around 8. By mid-morning, visibility returned. At 9:12, he spotted another sniper, this time nearly 300 yards out. He fired. The man fell. Minutes later, the earth around the bunker exploded. Mortar rounds slammed into the ground. The Japanese had finally pinpointed his firing position. George sprinted through the mud, diving behind a fallen tree just as a barrage destroyed the bunker he'd been using. He wiped the mud from his scope and settled into a new firing position. The jungle was no longer silent, it felt alive, watching him back. That afternoon, he killed 2 more snipers, each one harder to find, harder to hit.
As the sun was going down, he returned to headquarters with 8 confirmed kills in 2 days. Only 3 enemy snipers remained somewhere in the groves. On January 24th, rain delayed his movement again. By the time he took position, he had chosen a new location, a group of rocks the Marines once used as a machine gun nest. The elevation gave him a different angle. At 8:17, he spotted a sniper hiding in a palm tree just 40 feet up, which was unusual. The angle was too easy, too obvious. It felt wrong. Instead of firing, George scanned the trees around it. 11 minutes later, he found the real threat. Another sniper high inside a banyan tree, perfectly concealed and facing George's old position. The palm tree sniper was bait. The banyan sniper was the trap. George used the bait against them. He shot the decoy first, then immediately swung the rifle and fired at the hidden sniper before the man could fully react. 2 more bodies fell through the leaves. But his shot gave away his position. Machine gun fire ripped across the rocks. George rolled off the edge and escaped into a muddy drainage ditch. Bullets cracked above him as he stayed submerged, waiting. When the firing finally stopped, he crawled out and made his way to a new position, a shell crater partially filled with rainwater. He sucked in a slow breath, lifted his rifle, and scanned the trees again. Only 1 sniper remained. This one was the smartest. He didn't hide in the trees like the others. At 9:47, he saw movement low to the ground, a shadow crawling through the undergrowth, studying the rocks, moving slowly but with purpose. The Japanese soldier stopped only when he reached the same rock line George had used earlier. He was hunting the hunter.
George waited underwater, barely breathing. The sniper, unaware of how close he was, took up a position near the rocks and watched the wrong direction. It was another trap. George scanned again. Behind a fallen tree trunk 70 yards away, a second Japanese soldier lay motionless, with his rifle aimed toward where George should have been. 2 men working together. A sweep. A silent trap. When both men turned and began moving east to search the jungle, George rose quietly from the water. Their backs were exposed. He fired once, dropping the closest soldier. He worked the bolt quickly and fired at the second man before he could return fire. Both fell. He had eliminated all 11 snipers. But the jungle was not finished with him. Moments later, the sound of voices came from the tree line. A Japanese recovery team was approaching, at least 6 men. They found the bodies and then found the boot tracks leading toward the crater. George sank back into the water. At 10:31, one soldier looked right into the crater and met George's eyes. The shot echoed. 2 more soldiers appeared at the rim. George fired again and again. Mud splashed, bullets cracked overhead. Shouting echoed through the jungle. George ran, desperate to put distance between him and the approaching soldiers. He dove behind a fallen tree and fired again, hitting another Japanese soldier closing in. His rifle was nearly empty. He could hear voices surrounding him, moving fast. He broke contact, sprinted through vines and broken branches, and didn't stop until he reached another crater farther north. The voices faded. They were no longer chasing him. He moved slowly, staying low, heading back toward American lines. His uniform was soaked. His rifle was muddy. He had only 2 rounds left. At 11:13, he reached friendly territory. A Marine sentry challenged him, then guided him inside. His commander listened to his report in complete silence. 11 snipers killed across 4 days, all with a rifle the Army once mocked. He was told to rest. The battalion was moving east soon, and Point Cruz was no longer a priority. The Japanese were beginning to evacuate the island. George cleaned his rifle in his tent that afternoon. He worked quietly, running patches through the barrel, wiping mud from the bolt. For a long moment, he just stared at the rifle. The jungle had almost taken it from him. It had almost taken him too. But his war was far from over. Just months later, he found himself in another jungle, this time in Burma, marching with Merrill's marauders, an American long-range unit designed to slip behind Japanese lines. The conditions were brutal. Steep hills, dense bamboo forests, rivers that swallowed entire patrols, and diseases that weakened even the strongest men. The mission? Help capture the strategic airfield at Mitgiana, deep inside enemy territory. The march began in February 1944. The unit carried everything on their backs: food, ammunition, medical supplies. No vehicles, no heavy artillery, just mules and determination. They traveled more than 200 miles in the first month, climbing mountains, crossing rivers, and fighting small enemy groups along the way. Many men collapsed from exhaustion or malaria. Some had to be carried. Some never got back up. George carried his Winchester again, modified with a lighter scope and lighter stock for the long march. In Burma, opportunities for long-range shots were rare, but when they came, George used them with the same calm precision he had shown on Guadalcanal. At a river crossing, he spotted a Japanese officer directing troops and dropped him with a single shot from more than 400 yards away. A few weeks later, he eliminated a machine gun crew blocking a trail. In another moment, he neutralized a sniper who had pinned down part of the column. He fired only when necessary, never twice from the same place. By May, the marauders reached the outskirts of Mitgiana. They were reduced by sickness, exhaustion, and constant movement. Still, they pushed forward. After weeks of fighting, they finally captured the airfield. But the unit was spent. Too many men had fallen sick. Too many had died on the trails. The marauders were no longer fit for combat. George survived the campaign, but not without wounds. A Japanese rifle round tore through his left shoulder during an engagement near the Tanambao River. He was pulled away from the front, treated, and ordered to rest. He never again returned to frontline combat. His war ended later that year. The rifle survived with him. Its barrel still held the memory of every shot fired in silence, every breath taken in the jungle, every moment he waited between life and death. George would go home and live a long life. He would rarely speak of what he had done. Most people around him never knew how many lives he had saved in that grove on Guadalcanal, or how many times he had stood alone in the jungle of Burma, watching through a scope while the world moved quietly below him. His story almost disappeared until someone opened an old manuscript he wrote just after the war and realized the quiet man had lived through some of the most intense sniper engagements in American history. If you're watching this, you're helping keep his memory alive. Stories like this fade unless someone listens. Thank you for being part of remembering the soldiers whose names were almost lost to time.